Hi everyone, and welcome to our lecture on client ambivalence and motivational interviewing. It's a really important aspect of your screening and assessment of clients. So in terms of what we're wanting to assess, an additional piece of information that's really critical to our work with clients is really having an understanding of where they are in relation to change. So we often talk about the difference between a client's willingness to change and their capacity to change, readiness to change. This is really, really important, particularly for clients who struggle around alcohol or other drug dependency, because we've already established that avoidant coping is a key style of coping, and so change becomes really confronting for them. Sometimes we will work with clients who demonstrate willingness to change, and yet they become incredibly stuck around capacity, the how to change, and that's where our work with them becomes really critical, because we can be change agents that facilitate that process of navigating change and establishing healthier adaptive coping mechanisms. So in AOD work, it's become understood that client ambivalence to change is an expected phenomena. It involves the client weighing up the costs and benefits of changing versus some of the costs and benefits of not changing. And if we understand how difficult change can be, that any change can produce a sense of loss for us, that client ambivalence becomes more, reasonable and understandable. Change can be very slow and difficult for some people, and it can be extremely anxiety-provoking also. And what occurs is change produces a natural state of being for many people called ambivalence. That's when we're kind of not sure if we're wanting the change or we do want the change. And what's happened in AOD is we've really moved away from this concept of people just being difficult and resistant. So we no longer use that language. We understand that ambivalence produces high levels of anxiety, and this is what leads to avoidance and perhaps procrastinating that change process. So people can come unstuck in this ambivalent stage, which is often mistaken for resistance. Now, motivational interviewing is something that we'll be looking at as a substance use counselling model, which has been proven to be very effective in terms of resolving client ambivalence. Now, Prochaska and DiClemente are two theorists that developed something called the change model. Now, this change model has been critiqued over time. However, it's still incredibly useful and used broadly in AOD. So I've just summarized the key sort of stages of the change model. There's pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance. Now, when a client presents to counselling, one of the key roles we need to do is to assess at what stage they are with regards to the change model. And we look for indicators of readiness, willingness, obstacles, fears around change. Zooming into each of those stages, I've created this table for you that describes the particular stage, the characteristics, and the strategies. Now, this is something that you will need to demonstrate in your assessment 1 and assessment 3 in terms of, and also your role plays. Having conversations that and asking questions that will help you determine at what stage the client is sitting in, and ideally what we're wanting to do using motivational interviewing is to help a client shift from being pre-contemplative to entering the contemplative and certainly preparation action stages of change. So looking at that just briefly, pre-contemplation is when a client is in denial, they're minimizing their use or the problems associated with their use. They will tend to externalize blame. They've had previous attempts perhaps and have been really unsuccessful, and so perhaps they've developed like a defeated mindset around change. Strategies that you can use with a client who's pre-contemplative is to really just focus on rapport building, meeting them without any judgment but rather acceptance, and really exploring their relationship with a substance. So I'm really curious about the benefits that they get from using, as well as some of the negative consequences, and just that initial assessment about the risks and protective factors occurs in this pre-contemplative stage. I tend to be very gentle and with clients in this stage because generally they're very mistrustful and wary, and so I'm wanting to generate a sense of connection and trust. Then contemplation is when you see a shift and the client is starting to weigh up benefits and costs, starting to kind of sit with the fact that they do have some issues. And so you're wanting to identify barriers, misconceptions, to name some of the fears and concerns and obstacles to change, and to identify some natural supports they have in their life, their internal strengths, resources, as well as external. Now, we'll be looking at this in more detail in the BBC, so I'll leave that table there. So what is this motivational interviewing? It's an evidence-based model that was created by Miller and Rolnick. It's very widely used, and basically it's a model for talking to people about change, ambivalence, and helping people to elicit their own journey of change so that they're moving in a healthier direction. It's very respectful, and so it aligns beautifully with the principles of person-centered therapy. We're wanting to reduce any power imbalance that occurs in that counselor-client relationship. We're wanting to generate something called mutuality, where we're working collaboratively and we're opening up conversation and dialogue with the client in a really safe way. We're wanting to emphasize the individual's right in defining their own problems and making choices about how to best respond to them. So there is no sense of coercion or giving clients ultimatums. Motivation or client ambivalence, remembering we're challenging that word resistance, are viewed in MI as products of an interaction. So if my aim in working with a client is to really connect authentically, earn a client's trust and respect, and because what I'm wanting to achieve is a shift in sense of belief, inner trust, and therefore motivation. I find that if a client continues to be very resistant and has difficulty engaging, it invites me to reflect on my practice with that client and whether I need to invest more time in the therapeutic relationship. These are some of the principles where we're avoiding labeling clients, rather we're meeting them with empathic immersion, emotional attunement. We're wanting to support the client's sense of self-efficacy, that is the personal agency to change from within, where we practice temperance and discrepancy and discernment. And what we're wanting to do is also assess the client's cognitive and emotional dissonance. Now, generally, the clients that I've supported will present with a sense of guilt and shame. And what that indicates to me is that there is this huge gap between the way in which they're behaving because of their drug use, and who they truly are and their more authentic selves. And when there is that gap between a person's values and how they are acting in the world when they're in active addiction, it produces cognitive dissonance, so lots of confusion, distress, anxiety, a sense of overwhelm and disorganized thinking, and emotional dissonance, so a sense of self-loathing, distress, depression, anxiety, internalizing of shame. So those are things that I want to assess so that I can intervene with clients in a more therapeutic, profound way. I'm wanting to look at the pros and cons of change, and often I'll ask something called the workability situation, particularly when a client is externalizing a lot of blame, in denial around their issue, and eventually arrive at this question of, how is this working for you? You've just shared with me you've lost your wife, you're unemployed, you're really struggling to make ends meet, you've been transient for a while, so there's something in your story that's telling me it's not working for you. Where are you at with that? Now, research shows that the MI approach as a drug intervention has more probability of producing long-term change versus periodic change. So the spirit of MI has 4 components. There's partnership with the client, where you're working collaboratively and we're wanting to avoid that expert role. We're wanting to give a client the sense of unconditional positive regard. We're wanting to respect their autonomy in the process, to see their potential, to honor their strengths and perspective, and to really see the core person. So to really separate out the person from the behavior. So we're wanting to meet them with compassion, and at all times we're wanting to work in the best interests of our client. Evocation is about, comes from a person-centered perspective, in that we genuinely believe that ideas, goals need to come from the client. If we impose those goals on a client or ideas, then they're less likely to act on these. So it's about facilitating possibility within the client, and they're more likely to act on that. So if we think about the process of MI, we're wanting to engage the client, earn trust and respect, build genuine connection, together explore and set some goals. We're wanting to elicit client motivation and then create a change plan. How do we do this? There are some basic counselling skills. All of our counselling skills come into play, and we often refer to these as OARS skills. We're wanting to ask probing, exploratory questions. We're wanting to validate any small changes we see, and certainly the client's strengths. Sometimes if they've shown up to session, I'm affirming that, because I know how much courage it takes to just show up. We're reflecting on aspects of their story, and we're reflecting feelings, and we're offering feedback and summary. So being quite transparent about our thinking as well with the client. Now, we're looking for change talk in a client, and I notice it when they say, I wish I had this, or I really want this, or this isn't working for me anymore. But I can also ask questions that will generate change talk for the client. Why do you want to make changes? What are some of the reasons to change? What are benefits that would help you, that you'd gain by changing? How might you make that change? What can your first step be?